when you're younger, relationships are a lot easier to build. It's like you're in the same class, you end up being friends, that kind of a thing. And they tend to sort of last seemingly a bit longer, and you make friends with people and you think you're going to be friends with them forever, right? In the moment. And you start to realize that's not the case. And oftentimes those friendships sort of fall apart. And yeah, you start to grow up and you realize, hey, like if you don't pay attention to those relationships well enough and don't tend to them well enough, they disappear, right? And you end up alone in a lot of cases. And it made me realize. Welcome to Theory of Entertainment. I am coming back from the theater, the movie theater. So what was I doing at the movie theater, you might ask? Well, today was a date night. So my wife and I left the kids at home, went out, got some dinner, and of course we watched Spiderman Brand New Day. The movie begins with Spidey and a little like montage of, his life after the previous movie, which is Spider-Man No Way Home. For those of you who did or did not watch No Way Home, at the end of that movie, Peter has to make an important decision, which ultimately changes his entire life and switches up the status quo, basically, of Peter Parker in this case. And in this movie, you kind of pick up from that decision, and it's him having to grapple with that decision throughout the film. Now, in the movie, you get a bunch of different cameos from a bunch of different characters in the MCU in particular, and some interesting surprise visits from some characters as well, which I won't get into here because it's a spoiler free, of course. Now, one thing I really liked about the movie is that it does a great job early on of establishing its themes. And what I mean by that is you have to, when you have a theme in a movie, you have to be able to effectively set it up so that when you make certain decisions in the movie at the end of it, it has to sort of all coalesce and come together. And I think at least it's very obvious that they were going for something with this movie, and they're going for something with the theme in particular. And I'm talking about the main primary theme. And once you have that theme in place and in play early on, it makes some of the decisions that they made later on in the movie make way more sense. Because I remember when going into this movie, I thought, wait, what are all these characters doing here? This is supposed to be a Spider-Man movie. What's the point of inserting all these, characters that are normally not supposed to be in this kind of a movie? But then when I do think about what the theme is for the film and what they're kind of going with that kind of theme, I start to realize that, you know what? It makes sense that every single one of these characters are in play to some degree when they are in play. I can't get too much into it right now without getting into spoilers. Specifically, if I were to sort of lay out that theme, it would definitely get into spoilers, but it was really cool. I like it because the movie has layers to it. You're looking at it from that aspect of what can I learn from this, right? What can I take in and bring into, my own personal life, right? What can I actually do in terms of change certain things that I might be doing? And I think one of the things that the movie definitely brings up, and you can kind of see it in the trailers a little bit, is this idea of someone throwing themselves away into their work and essentially ignoring their personal life and ignoring everything except what they're doing at work. And just the idea of someone becoming a workaholic, right? And in this case, you kind of get a lot of that within this film, and you have Peter having to deal with that. And then the conflicts that come up within the film sort of bring that into a head. And then ultimately, they're able to tie it up in the bow at the end, I think effectively enough. My biggest problems with the movie were probably the third act, which third acts are really hard to do, I think, in a lot of superhero movies, in the sense that they can kind of be hit or miss. Some of my favorite superhero movies ever have a great first act, awesome second act, and then they just can't stick the landing in that third act, right? And I think that with this one, because of how well they execute on their main theme and how it still kind of works towards the end of the movie, I think it still fits together at the end of the day. But there are some things holding the film back, in that I do think that because there's so much going on in the movie and so many different characters that are not just like throwaway characters, but like, main, MCU characters in the movie, it kind of takes away from the best parts of the film, which happen to be those Peter Parker moments, and specifically some of those Peter Parker moments with characters that are already within the franchise, right? So MJ, Ned, that kind of stuff. So it really does take away from that. And it also takes away from Peter's journey a little bit when you're having to figure out what in the world's, Bruce Banner doing here, or why in the world are we dealing with Punisher and all this kind of stuff, right? And not until it wraps it up in a bow at the end does it all make sense. But ultimately, that is a bit of a distraction. But overall, I definitely enjoyed the movie. My wife enjoyed it as well. It was really fun for her to watch it because I've been more optimistic about the MCU as of late. I think from Thunderbolts onward, I could tell that Marvel figured something out and they were back in business in terms of them delivering great characters and great character work, at least. And I could see that from since that film, I would say, at least, right? And I was anticipating this movie to be a good one. My wife was a skeptic between the two of us. She was essentially, done with Marvel for the most part. She also saw Thunderbolts and she saw Fantastic Four, and she enjoyed them. They thought they were okay. But when I would say the famous "We are so back" line, she wouldn't agree with me at all. But when watching this movie in the theater, I looked over at her and I said it, and she's like, "Yeah, we are." In the sense that, funny thing, 10 years ago, I think it's been 10 years. 10 years ago, her and I went and watched Captain America Civil War together. This was early on in our relationship. And here we are 10 years later watching another Tom Holland Spider-Man movie, and sort of being able to see that progression over time and see the character grow over time. It's really special. I think Tom Holland did a great job in this movie. I think that Ned Leeds' character, I'm forgetting the actor's name right now, unfortunately, but the guy who's playing Ned Leeds was enjoyable as well. Zendaya is given more to work with, I think, in this movie than she was in other ones. So it's more enjoyable for those reasons. And then Sadie Sink's character, whom I cannot talk about at all because this is supposed to be a spoiler-free review. Her character is a mystery character, right? But the execution with that character in this film, to me, is incredible. I really liked a lot of what was done. Now, I will say that the characterization that we get of this character, it is a character, ripped straight out of the comics, but I think that they're very different to, how do I put this? I don't think that what we saw on screen is what we get in the comics from the character for the most part, right? I think they really went their own route here in terms of what they want to do with the character. They really switched the character up immensely, right? With what they're like in the comics. And I don't know how I feel about that yet, but I will say, it's tough doing this without getting into spoilers. I do know how I feel about it, but I won't get into it until my spoiler review, which will come within the coming days, right? I need to digest the movie some more, which I'm going to be doing some of that live with you guys here today, right? But I'm going to be digesting it a bit more and sort of organizing my thoughts. But I will say I enjoyed Sadie Sink's character, and she was a much bigger part of the story than I thought she would be, significantly bigger. One thing as well is the movie's about 2 hours, 25 minutes. I wish it was a bit shorter. I think it would, if they could somehow have gotten it to maybe 2:05, I think it would have been like almost a perfect film, right? But there is some stuff in there where it's like, maybe we could have cut some ninja fights here or there. Maybe we could have cut, some montages here or there. And you could tell that they wanted to stuff this movie with a bunch of stuff, and then they had to cut it down later on. A great example is at the beginning, they have this montage of Spidey being Spidey over the course of 4 years. And he fights a lot of different villains and stuff. And it reminds me a lot of the Fantastic Four intro scene from the Fantastic Four movie, where they're also doing a montage of a lot of villains they're fighting as well. So you could tell that, again, they really wanted to cut the movie down from a 3-hour movie to 2:25, which is what it looks like they did. And I don't think they could have done any better, honestly, in terms of bringing it lower. But ideally, there's just something about that sweet spot of getting it down to 2:05, maybe 2:10 tops, that I think would have made the movie a bit better. But overall, man, just in terms of my overall thoughts here, I recommend the movie. I would say that it is good to great. right? It depends. I can't fully, the first time seeing a movie, it's almost like there's a spell upon you and you're not seeing things as well as you can or should, right? All you remember is kind of the feelings and the emotions of how you feel sort of coming out from it and whether or not you recommend it to someone. So I can't really get into all the details in terms of how good the movie is in terms of scale of 1 to 10, any of that stuff. For that, I'm going to need more viewings, more digesting to kind of figure it out. But just off the top of my head, ballparking things, I would definitely say that this is one of the better Spider-Man movies overall. I will say that also it is one of those movies where like you don't need that much history to be able to get into it and enjoy it, in the sense that funny enough, like my wife and I are watching it and we hadn't seen Spider-Man No Way Home in God knows how long, maybe 3 years, 2 years, I don't know, it's been a while, right? And she completely forgot a lot of the film, especially like the Aunt May stuff, which was showing up in this movie. And she also forgot some of the stuff regarding, the Doctor Strange stuff, right? And yet, despite that, she quite thoroughly enjoyed the movie, despite not remembering those things. So to me, I mean, you could maybe not even see No Way Home. And because of how well they execute in this movie, you would still have a good time. So overall, if you're on the fence on seeing it, if it's worth watching in terms of a Marvel movie, I definitely recommend it. I think that it is, specifically because I really do believe how well they execute on their theme and the sort of the message that they're pushing across in the film. They do a good job with it. And I think that the theme is very much like modern, I guess you could say. Not modern in a bad way, but modern in a sense of it's something that a lot of us are dealing with and are facing right now that is worth paying attention to, right? So I think because of those reasons, I definitely would recommend it. There's a lot to pull from in this movie. I'll end my review with this, which is sort of takeaways that I'm going to take from this movie and things that I'm going to implement into my own life based upon at least the first viewing, right? I think one of those big major ones is, actually, can I say this without spoiling the film? I don't know. Let me see. Yeah, I'll say that one of the main things and main takeaways for me, at least from this film, is making sure that I take the time to reach out to people within my personal life that I know, and take the time to do a good job of building solid relationships. One of the things that the movie makes me realize is because of the situation that happens with Peter and he sort of loses all the memories that he has with his friends, you realize very quickly that friendships are not that easy to build and they're not that easy to cultivate and definitely take some time. And one of the things I've noticed, as an adult now in my 30s, when you're younger, relationships are a lot easier to build. It's like you're in the same class, you end up being friends, that kind of a thing. And they tend to sort of last seemingly a bit longer, and you make friends with people and you think you're going to be friends with them forever, right? In the moment. And you start to realize that's not the case. And oftentimes those friendships sort of fall apart. And yeah, you start to grow up and you realize, hey, like if you don't pay attention to those relationships well enough and don't tend to them well enough, they disappear, right? And you end up alone in a lot of cases. And it made me realize the importance of really nurturing relationships and investing in those relationships in terms of time, in terms of whatever it might be, right? Because ultimately they're important. You need them, right? And I think for me, at least, coming in from watching this movie is making me realize that I'm gonna have to send some texts, make some phone calls, and yeah, like do things a bit differently, let's just say. So I definitely appreciated that aspect of the film and sort of what it's pushing, right? And again, this kind of gets into some spoilers without fully getting into spoilers, but that's my gist on it in terms of my takeaways from the movie. Now, the good news as well is this movie does have a lot of stuff in it. And by a lot of stuff, I mean, there's a lot of nuggets that you can take home with you and sort of implement into your own life. I think there's a lot of small things that once I get into spoilers later on in my spoiler review, I'll be able to talk about. But in terms of light spoilers, that's the most I'll take away. But ultimately, this is definitely a movie that I enjoyed watching. My wife enjoyed it. I'm going to watch it again a couple times. And then once I get my spoiler review ready, I will dive into some of those details in terms of major takeaways from the film, in terms of, stuff that we can sort of I can implement at least in my own life. And then also, I'm going to be able to dive into how well they execute on certain themes and how well they're actually able to illustrate these realities that we deal with on a day-to-day basis that we don't really think about, but when they're put into this context of this movie, it's, I think, quite beneficial. Now, when I look at this movie overall, what I'll say is that it has a very strong hook in the sense that you have the MCU characters, you have the action, you have all that stuff. So there's a nice hook that brings you into the movie. Pacing is nice as you're watching it. You don't get bored. There's stuff that's in there, right? And then when it comes to the substance, because every great superhero movie has a great hook, but also some great substance. What I will say with this one is that the hook is pretty solid. The action's pretty good. And man, Pete, or I should say Spider-Man in this looks incredible. Like that suit looks awesome. And yeah, he just looks so good. Like I could just watch, I could watch it all day, watch the movie all day essentially, right? In terms of how gorgeous the reds and the blues look, right? I mean, I had to go all red and blue for the showing tonight as well, right? Like it just, the colors pop and I really like it. It's unashamed, right? In its comic bookness. So the hook is really solid here. What I'll say to it is, I think where the movie is lacking, and it's ironic because I've been talking about the themes this entire time, but the themes of the movie, although good, I don't think that they're timeless and eternal in the same way that other themes have been in previous Spider-Man movies. And I think because of that, that's what may not put this movie as like a top tier Spider-Man film, right? A great example is, as a character, Spider-Man's main theme is, with great power comes great responsibility, right? And that is a timeless theme. It is incredible. There's so much you can do with it. And because of that, it's kind of hard to mess up the character of Spider-Man because that theme sort of is underlying them throughout their entire career, right? So what this movie ends up doing is they kind of spin that a little bit and reverse it a little bit in terms of what Spider-Man's arc is within the film. And because of that, the theme that they actually then execute upon, although it's, I would say, a relevant theme for, you know, our day and age, I don't think it's as timeless as the theme I just mentioned, as well as other themes that were in throughout other Spider-Man films. A No Way Home, for example, is a lot of people's favorite Spider-Man movie, or at least one of the better ones. And in that film, there's a couple of really strong themes that flow through that movie that are also themes that are very timeless, right? That Spider-Man ends up learning from those other Spider-Men. So ultimately, because of those things and the weight of those themes, it actually lifts that movie up much more than it needs to. Even though, for example, the plot's kind of weird, doesn't make sense, even though there's some, you know, writing issues here and there, because of how effective it executes on those particular themes that it chooses, it's able to, I think, edge out this film in terms of how good the movie is. Also, I would say it's also more hype, more action with No Way Home. So I wouldn't say that this is as good as No Way Home as a movie, but I will say that it's better than most other Spider-Man movies that have come out. And overall, it's definitely worth a watch. And in my case, and probably others, it's worth a rewatch as well. So with that said, I'm going off for 19 minutes here, but this has been, I think, a solid movie to watch, and I definitely recommend it. And with that said, stay tuned for my spoiler review, where I'm going to get really, really deep into some of these themes and some of the different things I've been able to pick up and learn from the movie, because there's a lot of great stuff in here. So hit the like button, subscribe for that spoiler review that will be coming in the next few days.